Ross Milne's story sounds like something straight out of a high-speed sports movie that suddenly takes a dark turn, except this one was painfully real and happened during the 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, when alpine skiing was still very much in its fearless cowboy era. Ross was a 19-year-old Australian skier, young, talented, and buzzing with that unstoppable energy that comes from being selected for the Olympics at an age when most people are still figuring out life. Australia was not exactly known as a winter sports powerhouse back then, so just getting an Australian skier onto the icy European slopes felt like a big deal. During a downhill training run on the Patrick-Ophel course, Ross launched himself down the mountain at incredible speed, skis humming, wind roaring in his ears, chasing the perfect line like every downhill racer does. But downhill skiing is a brutal game of margins, and on that day, something went terribly wrong. Ross lost control, flew off the course, and slammed into a tree at frightening speed. There were no crash barriers like today, no soft safety nets waiting to catch mistakes, just trees, ice, and gravity doing what they do best. He was badly injured and rushed for medical help, but tragically he died on the way to the hospital, turning what should have been an Olympic dream into a national heartbreak. News of his death sent shockwaves through the Australian team and the wider Olympic community, casting a heavy shadow over the Games before they had even properly begun. His older brother, Malcolm Milne, was also an Olympic skier and would later go on to represent Australia again, carrying both his own ambition and the weight of his brother's memory down the slopes. Ross's death became one of the earliest and most sobering reminders of just how dangerous alpine skiing could be, especially in an era when safety standards were minimal and athletes relied more on courage than protection. Helmets were basic, padding was rare, and course design often placed racers dangerously close to natural obstacles, making every training run a gamble. In the years that followed, incidents like Ross Milne's helped push the sport toward better safety measures, including improved helmets, clearer course marking, and protective fencing, changes that now feel normal but were once unheard of. Today, Ross Milne is remembered not just as a tragic headline, but as a symbol of the raw, high-risk spirit of early Olympic skiing, a teenager who chased speed on a frozen mountain and paid the ultimate price. His story reminds us that behind every Olympic event is real danger, real courage, and real people who risk everything for the thrill of going faster than anyone else. Even decades later, his name still echoes quietly whenever people talk about Olympic tragedies, because it represents a time when passion often ran ahead of preparation, and bravery sometimes crossed into vulnerability. For Australia, Ross Milne's loss was especially painful, marking the country's first Olympic death and forcing officials, athletes, and fans to confront the darker side of elite sport. There were no viral clips, no instant replays, just word of mouth, newspaper headlines, and stunned silence back home. Over time, his legacy became less about the accident itself and more about the lessons it left behind, shaping conversations around athlete safety, responsibility, and the true cost of chasing glory at unimaginable speeds. It stands today as a reminder that progress in sport is often written in sacrifice, memory, and stories that refuse to fade away despite time, technology, applause, medals, and records everywhere. Picture this. It is 1986, and you are walking through the West Edmonton Mall, Canada's crown jewel of indoor chaos and wonder. Amidst the glittering fountains, sprawling shops, and the smell of buttery popcorn, something called the Mindbender is whizzing by above your head. It is not just any roller coaster. This is a triple loop, steel, gravity-defying marvel of engineering, one of the tallest indoor coasters in the world at the time. Kids are cheering, teens are daring each other to scream louder, and the adults are clinging to the idea that this ride is probably safe enough, and for the most part, it was. But on June 14, 1986, that illusion of invincibility came crashing, literally, down. The Mindbender's last car, cruising into its third and final loop, suddenly derailed. Bolts had loosened, wheels failed, and in a horrifying instant the car jumped the track. Passengers were thrown from their seats, lap bars proved useless, and chaos erupted in the enclosed space where screams bounced off the walls. 3 people died instantly, and a 4th suffered injuries that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The mall, normally a haven of leisure and commerce, transformed into a scene of disbelief and grief. Staff and emergency crews rushed to the scene, while onlookers tried to process what had just happened in the air-conditioned bubble they had taken for granted. What went wrong was a mix of human error, mechanical failure, and design oversight. The investigation revealed that the wheel assembly, critical to keeping the coaster cars secured to the track, had loosened over time, a maintenance issue compounded by the ride's original design. Lap bars, which might have been fine for a gentle thrill, were woefully inadequate for a situation where cars were literally flying off the rails. It was a stark reminder that thrill rides are only as safe as the care and engineering that go into them, and that even the most exciting attractions hide a serious potential for disaster if neglected. In the aftermath, engineers, amusement park operators, and regulators were forced to take a long, hard look at safety standards. The Mindbender was not just repaired, it was fundamentally re-engineered, with stronger wheel assemblies, new restraints, and enhanced safety features to prevent anything like that from happening again. When it reopened in 1987, it was not just a ride anymore. It was a testament to lessons learned in the harshest possible way. Despite the tragedy, the Mindbender continued to thrill visitors for decades, carrying its legacy as both a beloved ride and a cautionary tale. Stories of the 1986 derailment are still shared today, a reminder that even in places designed for joy, vigilance matters. Survivors and families of victims often reflect on the day with a mix of sorrow and appreciation for life, while thrill seekers continue to flock to rides that push the boundaries of fear and excitement. The Mindbender incident also sparked broader conversations about amusement ride safety worldwide, influencing regulations, inspection protocols, and ride designs to prevent similar tragedies. While we can laugh and cheer at roller coasters, the story of the Mindbender reminds us that behind every loop and twist is a serious responsibility. The safety of the people who trust that the ride will bring exhilaration, not catastrophe. So, next time you strap into a roller coaster, it is worth a moment of gratitude for those engineers and inspectors who quietly keep the bolts tight, the tracks secure, and the thrills alive, because somewhere in Edmonton, that lesson was learned the hardest way possible. The Waco siege of 1993 is one of those historical events that sounds like it belongs in a thriller movie, but the reality was far darker and more tragic than any Hollywood script. It began with the Branch Davidians, a religious group led by David Koresh, living inside a compound near Waco, Texas, and it ended in a 51-day standoff that culminated in a catastrophic fire. The story starts with a federal raid on the compound by the ATF, who believed the group was illegally stockpiling weapons and possibly abusing children. The raid went badly from the start, a firefight erupted, and lives were lost on both sides. After that, the FBI surrounded the compound, and what followed was a tense, drawn-out negotiation that felt like a slow-motion disaster. Every day seemed to bring new attempts at communication, but the situation was complicated by fear, misunderstanding, and a leader who believed he was chosen for a divine purpose. The compound was not just a building, it was a world where people had their own rules and their own version of reality, and the outside world had a hard time understanding what was happening inside. In many ways, the siege became a clash of two realities, and the gap between them only grew wider as time passed. The FBI tried different tactics, including psychological pressure and tear gas, to force the group to surrender. Yet the Branch Davidians remained inside, and the compound became a sealed world, cut off from the outside. As the days passed, the strain on everyone involved grew. The people inside the compound, the agents outside, and the families waiting helplessly for any news. The siege became a national spectacle, and the media coverage only intensified the pressure on both sides. The cameras captured every moment, and people across the country watched the situation unfold in real time, turning it into a kind of tragic reality show. On the inside, people were dealing with limited supplies, growing anxiety, and the emotional burden of uncertainty. The children inside the compound were forced to live through a situation they could not fully understand, and the adults had to balance loyalty, fear, and survival. On the outside, the government faced criticism for how it handled the situation, while also dealing with the challenge of ending the standoff without causing mass casualties. Every decision felt like it could escalate into disaster, and every delay made the situation more dangerous. It was a situation where communication broke down, trust vanished, and the human cost was slowly rising with each passing day. When the final assault was launched on April 19, 1993, the world watched as gas was pumped into the building, and flames soon erupted. Whether the fire was started by the Branch Davidians, accidentally caused by the gas, or influenced by other factors remains a subject of debate, but the result was devastating. 76 people died, including many children, and David Koresh was among the casualties. The tragedy shook the nation and sparked intense criticism of federal law enforcement, with many questioning whether the raid and the siege could have been handled differently. In the aftermath, the event became a symbol of government overreach to some, and a warning about extremist beliefs and charismatic leaders to others. It also influenced future events, including how authorities respond to armed groups and how citizens view government authority. Beyond the political debates, the human cost is what makes Waco unforgettable. Families lost loved ones, survivors were left with trauma, and the nation was forced to confront the dangerous blend of faith, power, and violence. The legal aftermath was also complex, with investigations and lawsuits, and the public remained divided on who was to blame. Even today, the Waco siege is still discussed in classrooms, documentaries, and political debates, and it has become a reference point for discussions about government power, religious freedom, and public safety. It is a story that feels like it should have had a clearer ending, but instead left behind a long list of questions and a legacy of pain that still echoes in American history. The Waco siege is a reminder that when fear and authority collide, the consequences can be catastrophic, and that the line between protecting the public and causing harm can become dangerously thin. It is a story of tragedy, but also a warning about how quickly things can spiral out of control when communication fails and mistrust takes over. Francisco Lazaro's death at the 1912 Stockholm Olympics sounds unreal until you remember early Olympic athletes were basically fearless experiments wrapped in national pride and misplaced confidence. The marathon took place under brutal summer heat, with temperatures climbing high enough to punish even well-prepared bodies. Lazaro, running for Portugal, followed advice common at the time and coated his body with grease, believing it would prevent sunburn and help his muscles perform smoothly. Instead, it quietly sabotaged him. Sweat is the body's cooling system, and the grease blocked it almost completely. As the race dragged on, his internal temperature kept rising while his body had no escape valve. Each step pushed him closer to disaster, even though he looked strong and determined from the outside. Around 30 kilometers in, his body finally gave up. He collapsed on the road, shocking spectators who assumed he was only exhausted, unaware they were watching history unfold in the worst possible way. It was a moment where outdated science, human endurance, and blind optimism collided under the sun, turning a hopeful Olympic dream into a quiet, irreversible tragedy before anyone truly understood what was happening to him that day on that long road ahead. Lazaro was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was already severe and unstoppable. He died from heat stroke and dehydration, becoming the first athlete to lose his life during an Olympic marathon. The incident shocked the sporting world and exposed how little was understood about endurance, hydration, and human limits. At the time, many coaches believed drinking water during a race weakened runners, a belief that now sounds absurd and dangerous. Combined with extreme heat and blocked sweating, this mindset created perfect conditions for disaster. Lazaro did not fail because he lacked strength or courage. If anything, he had too much determination. His body continued running long after it should have stopped, driven by willpower rather than physiology. His death forced officials to confront uncomfortable truths. Slowly, changes followed. Water stations became normal. medical staff were added, and athlete safety began to matter more than reckless displays of toughness alone. The tragedy quietly reshaped marathon culture, reminding organizers that the human body is not indestructible, and that ignoring biology in favor of bravado can turn sporting ambition into irreversible loss within minutes on the hottest days, especially during grueling endurance events watched by millions worldwide then and now alike everywhere. What makes Lazaro's story especially haunting is how ordinary it must have looked. There was no crash or dramatic accident, just a man slowly overheating from the inside while continuing forward on sheer determination. Spectators cheered, unaware his body temperature was rising to lethal levels. The irony is cruel. Greece, something associated with protection, became the silent villain. Over a century later, his name still appears whenever people discuss extreme endurance, outdated training myths, or the dangerous glorification of suffering in sports. His death reminds athletes that listening to the body is not weakness, but survival. Modern runners cooling themselves with water, electrolytes, and science unknowingly benefit from lessons written in tragedy. Lazaro did not chase fame recklessly. He trusted the knowledge of his era and paid for it. His legacy warns that courage without understanding can be deadly. It stands as a grim reminder that progress in sport has often been paid for with sweat, suffering, and lives lost, shaping safer futures through painful lessons that should never be forgotten by athletes, coaches, or fans around the world, especially when endurance events push human limits beyond reason or respect for biology and safety standards today. Everywhere still learning slowly. In the spring of 1997, Tulsa's Bell's amusement park was doing what it always did, blasting cheerful music, selling sticky cotton candy, and convincing people that screaming at a high speed was a totally normal hobby, when one ordinary day took a dark and unforgettable turn on the Wildcat roller coaster. The Wildcat was a wooden coaster with old school rattles, dramatic clacks, and that charming feeling that the ride might fall apart but probably wouldn't, which somehow made it more exciting. On April 20th, the coaster was loaded with riders. The cars began their climb, and then something went terribly wrong. Instead of conquering the hill like a champ, one car failed to crest the top and rolled backward, colliding with another car behind it. In the chaos that followed, a 14-year-old boy named Patrick Kurek was thrown from the ride and suffered fatal injuries, turning a day of thrills into a nightmare that no one present would ever forget. News spread quickly, and the story shocked people not just in Tulsa but across the country, because roller coasters are supposed to scare you in the fun way, not in the life-altering tragedy way. Investigators swarmed the park, and attention focused on mechanical failures, maintenance practices, and safety systems that were meant to prevent exactly this kind of disaster. Reports suggested that the coaster's anti-rollback mechanism, the device that stops cars from sliding backward on a hill, had failed, allowing gravity to take control with devastating consequences. Lawsuits followed, emotions ran high, and Bell's amusement park suddenly found itself under an unforgiving spotlight. Parents questioned ride safety everywhere. Regulators pushed for stricter inspections, and the Wildcat coaster was shut down permanently. Its once proud wooden tracks now symbols of a preventable tragedy. While Bell's stayed open for several more years, the accident cast a long shadow over the park, and many locals would always associate it with that terrible day rather than childhood memories of mini trains and arcade games. Eventually, Bell's amusement park closed for good in 2006, ending an era for Tulsa, and leaving behind stories that mixed nostalgia with heartbreak. Today, the 1997 Wildcat accident is often revisited in documentaries, articles, and YouTube videos that analyze what went wrong and why safety standards matter so much in amusement parks. It serves as a sobering reminder that behind the flashing lights and looping tracks, engineering precision and maintenance are not optional extras, but absolute necessities. The Bell's incident changed conversations about ride safety, reinforced the importance of inspections, and left a permanent mark on amusement park history, proving that even places built for joy can become sites of tragedy when systems fail and warnings are ignored. For many people who grew up visiting Bell's, the story feels surreal, like a glitch in a memory that was supposed to stay bright and uncomplicated. Because amusement parks are woven into childhood as symbols of carefree laughter and fearless bravery measured in inches of height requirements. Former employees have recalled how the mood at the park shifted instantly, with rides falling silent and staff struggling to process that fun had turned into grief in seconds. Over time, the Wildcat itself became almost mythic, discussed in hushed tones online, remembered not for its drops, but for the lessons it taught the industry. Safety upgrades, better training, and stricter oversight across parks owe something to that painful day, even if it came at an unbearable cost. In that way, the tragedy at Bells stands as a warning and a legacy, reminding everyone that thrills should never cost human life. On the evening of July 17, 1981, the Hyatt Regency Hotel atrium in Kansas City was filled with music, conversation, and quiet excitement. A tea dance was underway, drawing families, couples, and friends into the open lobby, many pausing to watch the scene from the suspended walkways above. The hotel itself was new, modern, and admired for its striking design, especially the skywalks that cross the atrium like floating bridges. Nothing about the moment suggested danger. And then, in a matter of seconds, the atmosphere changed permanently. The fourth-floor walkway suddenly gave way, crashing onto the second-floor walkway below it, and both fell together onto the crowded lobby floor. The collapse killed 114 people and injured more than 200, making it one of the deadliest structural disasters in American history. Many victims died instantly from crushing injuries, while others were trapped beneath twisted steel and concrete, suffering slowly as rescuers fought against time, debris, and limited resources. What makes the Hyatt Regency walkway collapse especially disturbing is that it was not caused by an external force such as an earthquake or explosion. Instead, it resulted from a fatal engineering decision. The original design called for continuous steel rods running from the ceiling through both walkways, evenly distributing the load. During construction, this design was changed to a split rod system, where the upper walkway supported the lower one. This seemingly minor modification doubled the load on the connections holding the walkways in place. Those connections were never redesigned to handle the increased stress. In fact, later investigations revealed that the structure could support only a fraction of the weight required by building codes. When hundreds of people gathered on and around the walkways during the dance, failure became inevitable. The bolts snapped, and gravity did the rest. The aftermath was chaotic and emotionally overwhelming. Emergency responders arrived quickly but faced immense challenges. Many victims were pinned beneath debris, and lifting the fallen walkways required heavy equipment that risked causing further injury. Water pipes had ruptured during the collapse, flooding the atrium and complicating rescue efforts. Doctors performed emergency procedures on site, including amputations, in desperate attempts to save lives. For hours, rescuers worked through the night, guided by faint voices calling for help from beneath the wreckage. While many lives were saved through extraordinary effort, the loss was devastating and deeply personal for the community. Beyond the immediate tragedy, the collapse sent shockwaves through the engineering and construction professions. Investigations concluded that the disaster was entirely preventable. Engineers had approved design changes without proper calculations, communication between parties was flawed, and warning signs were ignored. The incident became a landmark case study in engineering ethics, highlighting the responsibility professionals carry when public safety is at stake. Licenses were revoked, lawsuits followed, and building codes and review processes were strengthened in response. Today, the Hyatt Regency walkway collapse is remembered not just for its death toll, but for the lessons it forced into focus. It stands as a reminder that small decisions can carry enormous consequences, that safety margins exist for a reason, and that lives depend on careful, ethical practice. What began as an ordinary evening, meant for music and leisure, became a defining moment in engineering history, marked by loss, accountability, and the enduring obligation to learn from failure. Ignaz Stiefsohn's story sounds like something straight out of an old black and white newsreel, where brave men wore leather caps, aircraft looked like fancy kites, and safety rules were mostly optimistic suggestions. It was 1936. Berlin was hosting the Olympic Games, and everything was designed to look grand, powerful, and modern, including a dramatic aerial show featuring glider pilots. Enter Ignaz Stiefsohn, an Austrian glider pilot whose job that day was simple on paper and terrifying in reality. Glide gracefully through the sky and make it look effortless. Gliding back then was not the calm hobby it is today. It was experimental, risky, and heavily reliant on wooden frames, fabric wings, and faith. Stiefsohn took to the air during a demonstration flight meant to impress crowds and officials alike, showing how silent, engine-free flight was the future of aviation. Unfortunately, physics was not in a forgiving mood. Mid-flight, one of the glider's wings failed, snapping away like a bad plot twist nobody asked for. With no engine, no backup systems, and no second chances, the glider lost stability instantly and fell, ending Stiefsohn's life on the spot and turning a show of elegance into a moment of stunned horror. What makes this incident especially haunting is how quietly it sits in Olympic history, overshadowed by medals, records, and propaganda. The 1936 Berlin Games were obsessed with spectacle, and gliding was included as a demonstration sport to show off technological progress and human daring. Stiefsohn was not competing for gold, silver, or bronze, yet he paid the highest price imaginable. His death exposed the uncomfortable truth that early aviation was still very much a work in progress, where engineers learned by pushing limits and pilots trusted machines that sometimes betrayed them mid-air. There was no dramatic rescue attempt, no heroic survival, just a sudden mechanical failure and silence where applause was supposed to be. The crowd did not come to watch a man die, but history does not always ask for consent. For Stiefsohn, the Olympics became his final stage, even though his name would later fade into footnotes and lists rather than headlines. Despite the tragedy, Ignaz Stiefsohn's accident played a small but important role in shaping how aviation demonstrations were viewed. It reminded organizers that entertainment involving aircraft was never just entertainment, and that innovation often came wrapped in real danger. Today, gliders are stronger, safer, and tested to extremes, largely because early pilots like Stiefsohn unknowingly paid tuition with their lives. His story is not about medals or victory ceremonies, but about courage, ambition, and the brutal learning curve of human flight. In a strange way, his silent glide and sudden fall symbolize the era itself, bold, ambitious, and still figuring things out the hard way. Remembering Ignaz Stiefsohn is less about glorifying tragedy and more about acknowledging that behind every polished modern sport or technology lies a trail of risk, sacrifice, and people who never got to land safely. The irony is that gliding was meant to represent peaceful, graceful flight, free from noise and violence, yet it delivered one of the most abrupt and violent moments connected to the games. There were no engines screaming, no explosions, just the cruel snap of structure giving up. In an Olympics remembered for its pageantry, Stiefsohn's final flight quietly reminds us that progress has always demanded bravery, and sometimes it takes everything a person has to give. His name deserves remembrance, not as a statistic but as a human reminder that even beautiful dreams of flight once carried deadly uncertainty and real courage to today. In the spring of 2007, Osaka's Expoland amusement park was the scene of a tragedy that shook Japan's theme park industry and forever changed how roller coasters are inspected. The star attraction, Fujin Raijin II, was a steel roller coaster that had thrilled thousands of visitors with its twists, turns, and high-speed drops. On May 5th of that year, however, the ride would become infamous for all the wrong reasons. As the coaster sped along its track, one of its steel axles fractured, causing a car to derail violently. In an instant, what was supposed to be a thrilling adventure turned into a nightmare. A 19-year-old woman lost her life, and 19 other riders sustained serious injuries. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic and horrifying, with the screams of riders filling the air and emergency crews rushing to the scene. The derailment was not a freak accident in the sense of sheer bad luck. It was a preventable disaster stemming from years of overlooked maintenance. Investigators later discovered that the axle failure was caused by metal fatigue, a phenomenon where repeated stress weakens the steel over time. Even more alarming was the revelation that Expoland had skipped crucial non-destructive safety inspections, which could have detected the axle's weakening before it catastrophically failed. This combination of mechanical failure and human negligence turned a routine ride into a tragic lesson in engineering oversight. The impact of the Hyatt Regency accident extended far beyond the walls of Expoland. For the Japanese public, it was a stark reminder that amusement parks, often seen as safe havens of fun, could harbor hidden dangers if safety protocols were ignored. Media coverage highlighted not just the tragedy itself, but the systemic issues within park management, sparking widespread debate about the adequacy of safety inspections in Japan's amusement industry. Regulators responded with stricter safety standards, making regular, thorough inspections of rides mandatory and penalizing parks that failed to comply. The accident also prompted a re-evaluation of ride design, focusing on the durability of critical components like axles and wheels. Engineers began implementing more robust preventive maintenance schedules, and parks introduced real-time monitoring systems to catch early signs of wear and tear. While these measures came too late for those affected by the Hyatt Regency crash, they have likely prevented countless other incidents, turning a tragic event into a catalyst for safety improvements. Expoland itself, once a bustling hub of family entertainment, could not recover from the accident's aftermath. Attendance plummeted as public trust in the park evaporated, and the financial burden of lawsuits and retrofitting safety measures proved insurmountable. By 2009, Expoland closed its doors permanently, leaving behind memories of excitement, fun, and the sobering reminder of what can happen when thrill and safety collide. The Hyatt Regency derailment continues to serve as a case study for engineers, safety inspectors, and amusement park enthusiasts alike, a cautionary tale that reminds us that behind every thrilling loop and drop lies the responsibility of those who design, maintain, and operate these rides. While roller coasters are meant to deliver adrenaline and joy, the story of Hyatt Regency underscores the essential balance between excitement and safety, illustrating that the consequences of neglect can be as sharp and sudden as the twists of the coaster itself. The accident is remembered not just for the lives lost, but for the lessons it forced the industry to confront, cementing its place in roller coaster history as both tragic and transformative. The Big Bayou Canot train wreck is one of those tragedies that sounds like it could only happen in a disaster movie, but it was very real. And it happened in the quiet early hours of September 22, 1993. In the thick fog of the Alabama swamp, a towboat called the Movia was pushing a string of barges along the Mobile River. The pilot, disoriented by the dense fog and the confusing river layout, accidentally steered into an unofficial side channel. The barges struck the Big Bayou Canot railroad bridge with enough force to shift a section of the bridge several feet out of alignment. It was not dramatic at first. The bridge did not collapse, the rails did not break, and the signals on the line still showed a clear track. But that was the problem, because the rails were bent rather than snapped. The railway system never realized anything was wrong, and the bridge was left in a dangerous and silent state of failure. The bridge had been designed as a swing bridge, but it was not properly secured for this type of impact, and the structure was vulnerable to being displaced by the barges. Minutes later, the Amtrak Sunset Limited, carrying about 220 passengers and crew, approached the bridge at normal speed, unaware that the track ahead was twisted and unsafe. The train hit the misaligned rails and derailed instantly. The front locomotives and several cars plunged into the water and marsh below, a scene made even more horrifying by the darkness and the isolation of the swamp. The crash was devastating, and the aftermath was chaotic. Many passengers were trapped inside the wreckage, and rescue efforts were hampered by the remote location, the fog, and the difficulty of reaching the scene by land. The water and mud, combined with ruptured fuel tanks and smoke, turned the situation into a life-or-death struggle. Survivors had to fight through burning wreckage and rising water, while emergency teams worked to pull people out of the swamp. The entire event was a tragic reminder of how quickly normal travel can become a disaster when multiple failures occur together. In total, 47 people lost their lives, and more than 100 were injured, making it the deadliest accident in Amtrak history. What makes the incident especially chilling is that it was preventable in several ways. The barge pilot lacked adequate navigation equipment and training for operating in foggy conditions, and the bridge design did not include sufficient protection to prevent displacement from a collision. The signaling system, designed to detect broken rails, could not recognize bent tracks, leaving the train crew with no warning until it was too late. The investigation that followed highlighted a series of safety failures across multiple organizations, and it prompted changes in bridge protection standards, barge navigation procedures, and rail signaling systems. Even years later, the big Bayou Canot disaster remains a stark reminder of how a small mistake, a misdirected barge in the fog, can trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. It also shows how important it is for safety systems to be able to detect not only total failures, but also subtle and dangerous problems that may not be obvious until disaster strikes. In the end, the tragedy is remembered not only for the lives lost, but also for the lessons it forced the transportation industry to learn the hard way. It is Rome, 1960. And the Olympic Games are in full swing. The city is buzzing with excitement. Athletes are flexing their muscles, and spectators are ready to cheer their hearts out. Among the hopefuls is Knud Enemark Jensen, a Danish cyclist with legs like pistons and a competitive streak that could scare anyone. He is gearing up for the 100-kilometer team time trial, a race that would make even seasoned cyclists sweat just thinking about it. And sweat, well, it turns out, would play a pivotal role in this story. Rome is baking under the scorching summer sun, with temperatures soaring above 40 degrees, and the asphalt radiates heat like a giant frying pan. Poor Knud and his teammates are about to find out what happens when human endurance meets literal fire. The crowd cheers as the cyclists pedal off, helmets glinting, muscles flexing, hearts racing, adrenaline pumping. Early on, everything seems textbook perfect. Synchronized pedaling, team strategies unfolding, and the thrill of Olympic glory in full display. But as the kilometers tick by, Rome's brutal heat starts turning this race into a literal battle of man versus sun. Jensen, ever the determined athlete, pushes on, no water breaks, no shortcuts, just pure willpower. Little does anyone know, the combination of extreme heat, physical exhaustion, and an ambitious human spirit is about to collide in a way no one could have imagined. About halfway through the race, spectators notice something alarming. Knud's riding becomes uneven, his once precise pedaling starting to wobble like a robot running low on batteries. His face is red, sweaty, and tense, not the picture of an Olympic champion anymore, but a man fighting a battle against his own body. Suddenly, tragedy strikes. Knud collapses on his bike. The crowd gasps, medics rush over, and the reality of the situation hits. This is not just exhaustion. In the chaos, he fractures his skull when he hits the road, a critical injury that will prove fatal. Despite immediate medical attention and rushed hospitalization, the brave Danish cyclist dies a few hours later, leaving the sporting world in shock. The cause is officially heat stroke, but whispers circulate about performance-enhancing substances, stimulants like amphetamines and vasodilators that are common at the time. These chemicals likely interfere with the body's natural cooling system, making the heat even more deadly. It is a grim reminder that Olympic glory comes with risks, and sometimes pushing the human body beyond its limits can have catastrophic consequences. Knud Enemark Jensen's death is not just a tragic headline, it becomes a wake-up call for the sports world. Suddenly, questions about athlete safety, drug use, and extreme endurance challenges are unavoidable. His collapse directly influences the establishment of the IOC Medical Commission in 1967 and lays the groundwork for formal anti-doping regulations, a legacy that makes modern sports safer, fairer, and more transparent. Today, when athletes hydrate meticulously, monitor body temperature, and undergo routine drug testing, Some of that vigilance traces back to the unfortunate lessons learned from Rome, 1960. In the end, while Knud never gets to enjoy Olympic glory, his story lives on as a reminder of human ambition, the perils of extreme competition, and the thin line between courage and catastrophe. It is a tale that is tragic yet oddly inspiring. A man who chases excellence, pushes through hellish heat, and inadvertently shapes the future of international sports. Next time anyone complains about running in the sun or enduring a long bike ride, remembering Jensen, a guy who pedals his heart out under a Roman inferno, and in doing so leaves a mark that goes far beyond medals, makes that effort seem a little less daunting. On a seemingly ordinary spring day in London, Battersea Park Fun Fair stood as a symbol of post-war leisure, a place where families gathered to escape routine and indulge in harmless excitement. The sounds of laughter, the smell of snacks, and the rhythmic clatter of rides created an atmosphere that felt safe and familiar. Towering above the park was the Big Dipper roller coaster, a wooden structure that had become the fun fair's defining attraction. It promised controlled fear, brief adrenaline, and the reassurance that thrills ended safely at the platform. Few could have imagined that this landmark ride would soon become associated not with joy, but with one of the darkest moments in British amusement park history. On 30th of May 1972, what began as a routine ride turned into a catastrophic failure that exposed serious flaws in safety oversight, maintenance, and accountability, ultimately resulting in the deaths of 5 children and leaving a lasting mark on public consciousness. The Big Dipper was designed to deliver excitement through steep climbs and dramatic drops, relying heavily on mechanical systems that demanded constant inspection and precise operation. On that day, as a train ascended the initial lift hill, the haulage rope suddenly snapped. Without a functioning anti-rollback mechanism to prevent backward motion, the train began accelerating in reverse, rapidly gaining speed as gravity took control. What followed was a violent derailment at the base of the hill, where carriages collided, splintered, and piled into one another with devastating force. In seconds, the illusion of safety that defined amusement rides vanished, replaced by chaos, confusion, and irreversible loss. Emergency services rushed to the scene, but the scale of the tragedy quickly became apparent as injured riders were pulled from wreckage and lives were lost before help could change the outcome. Beyond the immediate horror, the Battersea Park Fun Fair disaster forced uncomfortable questions into the public arena. Investigations revealed that the Big Dipper suffered from numerous mechanical faults, inadequate maintenance, and a troubling lack of proper safety controls. The ride had been operating despite known issues, highlighting a broader culture in which entertainment value outweighed rigorous risk assessment. Although criminal charges were brought against those responsible for operating and maintaining the ride, the eventual acquittals left many families feeling that justice had not fully addressed the magnitude of the loss. The incident exposed weaknesses in regulation at a time when amusement rides were becoming increasingly complex, yet oversight had not evolved to match their risks. The aftermath of the disaster extended far beyond Battersea Park itself. Public trust in fairground safety was shaken, and the tragedy became a catalyst for discussions around stricter safety standards and inspections across the United Kingdom. The Big Dipper was dismantled, and within 2 years the entire fun fair closed, leaving behind an empty space where excitement once stood. For decades, however, the memory of the children who died remained largely unmarked, their story known more through reports and recollections than public acknowledgement. It was only 50 years later that a memorial was finally installed, serving as a quiet reminder of the lives lost and the lessons learned at a painful cost. The Battersea Park Fun Fair disaster stands today not merely as an accident, but as a warning about complacency, responsibility, and the fragile line between thrill and tragedy. On a cold February night in 2003, the Station nightclub in West Warwick, Rhode Island, was expected to be nothing more than another crowded music venue hosting a rock concert. a place where ordinary people gathered to unwind, socialize, and enjoy live music. The band Great White had just begun their performance when small indoor pyrotechnics were ignited near the stage, sending sparks upward toward the ceiling and walls. Almost immediately, those sparks caught on highly flammable soundproofing foam that lined the interior of the club, material that should never have been installed in a public venue. At first, many audience members did not react with urgency, assuming the flames were part of the show or a minor issue that would be quickly controlled. That hesitation proved deadly. Within seconds, the fire raced across the walls and ceiling, producing thick black smoke that rapidly filled the room. Visibility dropped to nearly zero, breathing became painful, and confusion spread faster than the flames themselves. In a space designed for entertainment rather than emergency evacuation, the situation deteriorated at an alarming speed. As panic set in, most people instinctively moved toward the main entrance, the door they had used to enter, and the one their minds recognized under stress. This natural human response created a catastrophic bottleneck, as hundreds of people pressed toward the same exit at once. Individuals fell, were pushed down, or became trapped beneath others, forming a human pile that blocked the doorway and prevented escape. Other exits existed, but some were poorly marked, partially obstructed, or simply invisible in the darkness and smoke. The fire continued to intensify, and the toxic fumes became the primary killer. Many victims were overcome by smoke inhalation rather than burns, collapsing only feet from safety. In less than 90 seconds, the nightclub was fully engulfed, a time frame so brief it left almost no margin for correction or rescue. Firefighters arrived quickly and worked with extraordinary courage, but the speed and intensity of the fire meant that even immediate response could not undo the damage already done. By the end of the night, 100 people had lost their lives, and more than 200 others were injured, many suffering long-term physical harm and psychological trauma. The victims were not thrill-seekers or risk-takers, but ordinary concert-goers, students, workers, friends, and couples who had trusted that the venue they entered was safe. The aftermath revealed a series of failures, including the absence of an automatic sprinkler system, the use of dangerous building materials, overcrowding, and inadequate regulation of indoor pyrotechnics. Legal proceedings followed, resulting in criminal charges, settlements, and widespread changes to fire safety laws and building codes across the United States. The site of the nightclub was eventually transformed into a memorial park, a quiet space dedicated to remembrance and reflection. The station nightclub fire remains one of the most studied disasters in fire safety training, not because it was unusual, but because it demonstrated how quickly common oversights can combine into catastrophe. It stands as a somber reminder that safety regulations exist for a reason, that panic can be as lethal as fire, and that an ordinary night out can turn tragic when prevention fails. Imagine gearing up for the Winter Olympics, feeling like the king of the mountain, ready to launch down icy slopes at breakneck speed, adrenaline pumping, wind in your face, and dreams of gold glittering in your eyes. That was Nicolas Beauchetai, the Swiss speed skiing sensation, a guy whose skis practically seemed glued to the snow like they were extensions of his own legs. Everyone knew him as fearless, the kind of skier who made gravity nervous. The 1992 Albertville Winter Olympics were supposed to be his stage, his moment to show the world that Swiss skis could slice through air faster than a caffeinated bullet. But fate, it seems, had other plans, and it decided to crash his warm-up in the most shocking way possible. Picture this: a crisp, clear, alpine morning. Beauchetai swooshing down the slope, probably imagining he was already at the finish line, when out of nowhere, a giant snow grooming machine, the monstrous, tank-like contraption responsible for flattening the mountain, lurched into his path. And just like that, in an instant that felt both impossibly fast and unbearably slow, Nicholas collided with it. There was no dramatic last-second dodge, no heroic save. It was instant, brutal, and utterly heartbreaking. A warm-up run turned fatal. A moment meant to prime him for glory instead became a story of tragedy that shook the Olympic world. Now, let's take a second to really picture the scene, because it's almost surreal. These grooming machines are enormous beasts, huge metal treads churning snow into perfection. And here was Bochatai, a human blur of red and white, basically a Swiss rocket on skis. The contrast is absurd, if it weren't so tragic, the sleek precision of an Olympic athlete meeting the raw, industrial force of a snowcat in a freakish instant. It's the kind of accident that makes you think, how on earth does that even happen? But skiing safety, especially back in 1992, wasn't as polished as it is now. Athletes would warm up on open slopes while these machines were still doing their thing. A tiny miscalculation or a moment's distraction enough to turn practice into catastrophe. Bochatay's death was a shocking reminder that no matter how skilled you are, no matter how fast you fly, sometimes sheer chance can write the ending. The skiing world mourned him immediately. Fellow athletes, coaches, and fans were stunned. Whispers of, "How could this happen?" spread like wildfire. He was young, talented, and had the kind of charisma that made you root for him, even if you weren't Swiss or a skiing fan. The Olympics had seen crashes before, sure, but warm-up fatalities? That was a new, terrifying chapter. And yet, amid the sadness, Nicolas Bochatay's story remains oddly emblematic of what makes Olympic sports both thrilling and dangerous. There's a wild, almost reckless courage in athletes like him, a mix of talent, training, and sheer audacity that pushes them to test limits most of us wouldn't even dream of. Bochatay wasn't just skiing for medals. He was skiing because the mountains were calling, because speed was his art, and because life was too short to glide slowly. His accident changed how organizers thought about safety, how they separated machines from humans, and how athletes approached warm-ups. Today, when speed skiers blast down icy tracks, it's partly thanks to lessons learned from tragedies like his. And while the story is sad, there's something inspiring in remembering him not just as a victim of a freak accident, but as a fearless skier who chased velocity with unmatched passion. Nicolas Bochatay's name lives on, etched into Olympic history not only for his untimely death, but for the fearless energy he brought to the slopes, a reminder that the line between glory and disaster can be as thin as a ski's edge, and that sometimes heroes are remembered most for the way they dared to fly. Jillian's Wonderland Pier in Ocean City, New Jersey, was long seen as a symbol of family entertainment, a familiar boardwalk attraction where generations came for simple joys like arcade games, Ferris wheel rides, and modest roller coasters that promised excitement without real danger. Among these rides was the Wild Wonder, a small steel roller coaster that appeared tame compared to towering theme park giants, making it especially popular with parents and children. On August 28, 1999, however, this seemingly harmless ride became the site of one of the most tragic amusement park accidents in modern American history. That afternoon, Kimberly Bailey and her 8-year-old daughter Jessica boarded the Wild Wonder, expecting a brief thrill during what was meant to be a carefree summer day. As the train began its ascent up the lift hill, it failed to crest the incline. Instead, the coaster unexpectedly rolled backward, gaining speed as gravity took over. The anti-rollback safety mechanism, designed specifically to prevent such a scenario, did not function as intended. In a matter of seconds, the train reversed down the track and collided violently near the station, creating chaos both on the ride and among the stunned onlookers below. The consequences were devastating. Kimberly and Jessica Bailey were ejected from the front car during the rollback and sustained critical injuries. Despite emergency response efforts, both later died at the hospital. 2 other riders were injured in the collision, though they survived. The sudden shift from laughter and music to sirens and panic left an indelible mark on the Ocean City community. Witnesses described scenes of disbelief as families who had been enjoying the boardwalk moments earlier struggled to comprehend what had occurred. For a location built around the promise of safety and wholesome entertainment, the emotional impact was profound. The accident raised immediate and troubling questions about ride maintenance, inspection procedures, and regulatory oversight, not only at Jillian's Wonderland Pier, but across amusement parks nationwide. Investigations conducted after the incident revealed troubling deficiencies. The Wild Wonder coaster lacked adequate fail-safe systems, and safety inspections were criticized for being insufficiently rigorous. New Jersey authorities cited the park for violations and imposed fines, while the ride itself was permanently dismantled. More importantly, the tragedy prompted changes in state amusement ride regulations, leading to stricter inspection requirements and renewed scrutiny of older rides that had been operating for years without major upgrades. While these reforms came too late for the Bailey family, they played a role in preventing similar incidents elsewhere. The accident became a reference point in discussions about amusement ride safety, illustrating how even smaller, seemingly low-risk attractions can pose serious dangers when oversight fails. Despite the passage of time, the Wild Wonder tragedy remains a painful chapter in the history of Jillian's Wonderland Pier. It serves as a reminder that public trust in amusement parks is built not only on tradition and nostalgia, but on uncompromising attention to safety. For many locals, the memory of that day still lingers, quietly shaping how the pier is viewed and remembered. Beyond statistics and investigations, the story ultimately centers on a mother and daughter whose lives were cut short during an ordinary family outing. Their deaths transformed a moment of leisure into a lasting lesson about accountability, engineering responsibility, and the human cost of safety failures. The Wild Wonder accident stands as a sobering example of how quickly joy can turn to tragedy, and why vigilance and public safety can never be treated as optional. The Versailles wedding hall disaster in Jerusalem on May 24, 2001, remains one of the most devastating structural collapses in modern Israeli history, not only because of the number of lives lost, but also because it occurred during a moment of celebration when no one expected danger. The banquet hall, located on the third floor, was hosting a wedding reception for Karen and Asaf Dror, with approximately 650 to 700 guests in attendance. Families had gathered, dressed in their finest, filled with joy and excitement, and the atmosphere was full of music, dancing, and laughter. Then, without warning, the floor gave way. The concrete slab suddenly collapsed, plunging hundreds of people, along with tables and chairs, through 2 floors into the space below. The collapse was immediate and brutal, turning a joyous occasion into a catastrophic scene of destruction within seconds. Survivors later described the moment as surreal. One instant they were dancing, and the next they were falling into darkness, with debris and bodies around them. The scale of the disaster was enormous, and emergency responders arrived to find a scene of chaos and devastation, with many injured, trapped under heavy rubble. The immediate aftermath was horrifying, and the hall quickly became a disaster zone. Rescue teams worked through the night to pull survivors from the wreckage, often risking their own lives to reach those who were buried under concrete and twisted metal. The injured were taken to hospitals in critical condition, and the emotional shock was felt across the country. By the end of the night, 23 people had died, and hundreds were injured, making it one of the deadliest non-military accidents in Israel. The grief and confusion were compounded by the fact that the tragedy occurred during a wedding, a symbol of happiness and new beginnings. The families of the victims were left with unimaginable pain, and the community struggled to understand how a place designed for celebration could turn into a scene of such destruction. As the nation mourned, questions arose about how the building could have failed so suddenly and whether the collapse could have been prevented. Investigations that followed revealed serious structural failures and negligence. The hall had been built using a construction method known as the Paul-Call system, which was later found to be inadequate for supporting the weight and use of such a large hall. The situation was worsened by modifications and removals of key support structures that were made before the wedding, further weakening the building. The inquiry found that design and construction errors, along with insufficient oversight, contributed to the disaster. Several people, including engineers and the hall owners, were convicted for negligence and manslaughter, and the incident prompted major reforms in building safety regulations in Israel. The Versailles collapse remains a powerful reminder of the importance of structural integrity and strict oversight, especially in places where large groups gather. It stands as a tragic lesson that even in moments of happiness, disaster can strike when safety is compromised, and the memory of those lost continues to shape how public buildings are designed and regulated.